The Unsung Women of WWII. What History Forgot. Elena moved through the field hospital with steady hands, though inside she felt the constant pull of exhaustion and fear. The wounded arrived in waves, carried on stretchers through shattered streets, their cries piercing the din of distant bombings. Every time she stitched a torn uniform or cleaned a bloodied wound, she felt the weight of lives hanging in the balance. She comforted the young soldiers with quiet words, brushing back hair from fevered foreheads, whispering promises she couldn't always keep. Some nights, she slept on the floor beside the patients, listening to the groans and prayers, learning that courage often came in the quiet acts of care, rather than on a battlefield. Far away, Margaret Sinclair's fingers danced across the keys of the Enigma machine, translating enemy messages into intelligence that could change the course of a campaign. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp, and silence reigned except for the soft clack of typing. Every successful decryption brought relief, yet also tension. Each intercepted message carried lives in its code. She knew the world outside did not see her victories, and the lack of recognition never lessened the pressure. Her reward was the knowledge that somewhere a convoy would avoid ambush, a battalion would be reinforced, or a plan would succeed because of her. That invisible impact became her quiet triumph, her contribution to a war that demanded more than any one person could ever give. In the freezing factories of Moscow, Yelena Ivanova's hands were raw from welding and assembling armor plating, yet she moved with unwavering focus. The furnaces blazed, heat searing the cramped workspace, and the roar of machinery created a relentless rhythm. Each tank she helped complete would carry soldiers into battle, and each shell she prepared could determine whether an attack succeeded or failed. She and her colleagues took pride in precision, knowing mistakes could be fatal, yet every success strengthened their resolve. During rare breaks, they shared stories of home, family, and dreams deferred by war, and those fleeting moments of normalcy reminded them why their labor mattered. Meanwhile, in the shadowed alleys of Paris, Sophie Dubois moved silently, her footsteps light against cobblestones slick with rain. A coded message concealed in a letter rested in her coat pocket, and each encounter could reveal her true purpose to the occupying forces. She passed unnoticed through checkpoints, engaging in conversations with German officers under a veil of charm and casual innocence, gathering intelligence that could save lives. Every mission tested her nerve and wits, and the constant threat of discovery sharpened her senses. At night, she returned to a safe house, adrenaline still coursing, knowing that every successful delivery was a ripple across the broader struggle for freedom. The world of these women was one of relentless demands, courage in unseen moments, and triumphs that left no traces on history books. Elena's hospital became a place where ordinary women performed extraordinary acts of bravery, where life and death existed side by side, and where compassion itself was a weapon. Margaret's quiet brilliance transformed invisible codes into life-saving intelligence, shaping battles without ever leaving her room. Yelena's labor turned steel into survival, and Sophie's courage turned whispers into action, each contributing to victories the world would seldom remember. Late one evening, as the war raged on, all four women paused in their respective corners of the world, feeling the weight of their invisible service. Elena washed her hands of blood and dirt, staring at the soldiers who slept nearby, surviving another night because of her care. Margaret leaned back in her chair, exhausted yet triumphant, knowing that her decrypted messages had prevented countless deaths. Yelena wiped soot from her arms and gazed at the tanks lined for shipment, aware that her efforts had shielded lives she would never meet. Sophie tucked a message into a hidden pocket, breathing a silent prayer for the lives that depended on her stealth and cunning. They were ordinary women thrust into extraordinary circumstances, yet in those circumstances they became indispensable. Their courage was not lauded with medals or headlines. It was quiet, invisible, and uncelebrated, yet it mattered more than the world could ever fully measure. Through their hands, minds, and hearts, the machinery of war was kept in motion. Victories were shaped, and lives were saved. They were the unsung architects of history, and though the world may forget their names, the echoes of their bravery endured, woven into every triumph, every survival, and every story of resilience that emerged from the darkness of WWII. Spring turned to summer, and the war pressed relentlessly on every front. Elna moved through the field hospital with practiced efficiency, though exhaustion weighed heavily on her. The casualties had grown more severe, and the influx of wounded soldiers seemed endless. Each day brought new challenges: shrapnel embedded in limbs, burns that no ointment could fully heal, and the unspoken despair in the eyes of young men who had seen too much too soon. Yet Elena never faltered. She learned to anticipate pain, to soothe terror with a quiet word, and to triage with a precision born of necessity. Every life she saved became a small victory against the overwhelming tide of violence. Margaret Sinclair at Bletchley Park faced her own relentless pressure. The Enigma machines clattered endlessly as new codes arrived from the front, each more complex than the last. One decrypted message revealed an imminent enemy ambush on a convoy carrying reinforcements. She alerted command, her hands shaking with tension, knowing that a delay or misinterpretation could cost hundreds of lives. When word came back that the convoy had avoided disaster, relief washed over her, tempered by the knowledge that the war demanded constant vigilance. Her victories were invisible, yet profoundly consequential. In Moscow, Yelena Ivanova worked through sweltering days in the tank factory, the air thick with heat and the smell of burning metal. Production quotas had increased, and every mistake could have deadly consequences. One evening, she noticed a slight flaw in a turret mechanism, a misaligned gear that could jam under combat conditions. Without hesitation, she halted the assembly line and corrected it, knowing that a single oversight could doom the soldiers relying on that tank. Her attention to detail and unyielding dedication became emblematic of the countless women whose hands turned raw materials into instruments of survival. Meanwhile, Sophie Dubois navigated Paris with calculated grace. A new mission required her to extract intelligence from a heavily guarded German headquarters. Disguised as a seamstress, she passed through checkpoints with a mixture of charm and nerves, slipping coded messages into hidden seams of garments destined for resistance operatives. Each step was a gamble. A single misstep could mean imprisonment or death. Yet she moved with unwavering focus, understanding that the success of her mission could alter the course of local operations and save dozens of lives. The threads of their lives, though distant and unconnected by geography, wove a shared tapestry of courage, skill, and sacrifice. Elena, Margaret, Yelena, and Sophie each faced immense pressures in different ways, yet all carried the same burden: the knowledge that their work directly impacted human lives. Their triumphs were often quiet, unseen, and uncelebrated. Yet they were victories nonetheless, shaping the outcome of battles and altering the course of the war. One night, Elena lingered by a window of the hospital, listening to the distant rumble of artillery. She thought of the soldiers she had treated, the young men she had comforted, and the ones who had not survived. Her heart ached, but she also felt a quiet pride. In her hands, in her skill, in her endurance. Across Europe, Margaret deciphered another crucial message: saving lives without ever leaving her desk. In Moscow, Yelena tightened the last bolts on a newly completed tank, envisioning it on the front lines, protecting soldiers she would never meet. Sophie, in the shadowed streets of Paris, tucked the final note into a courier's bag, knowing it contained the key to an upcoming resistance operation. Each woman moved through the war in her own way, yet together they represented a force invisible to history, a network of courage and ingenuity that tipped the scales in ways generals and soldiers alone could not. Theirs was a war of endurance, intelligence, precision, and quiet heroism. And though the world would largely forget their names, the impact of their actions resonated in every survival, every victory, and every life touched by their extraordinary service. By midsummer, the war had intensified on every front. Reports from the field reached Elena with unnerving regularity. Some brought relief. Soldiers had survived ambushes, convoys had reached their destinations, and victories had been secured, while others carried grim news of the fallen. Each casualty weighed heavily on her heart, but she pushed forward, knowing that her skill and determination could mean the difference between life and death. She moved through the wards with quiet precision, stitching, bandaging, and comforting, her presence a stabilizing force amid chaos. Margaret's work at Bletchley Park had never felt more urgent. Intelligence revealed plans for an enemy offensive that threatened to cut off a critical supply line. Days and nights blurred together as she and her team worked tirelessly, decrypting messages with unrelenting focus. When the final message was cracked, she alerted command. Relief and pride mingled in her chest when she learned that troops had rerouted in time, avoiding disaster. Each decrypted cipher was invisible to the world, yet it carried immense weight, saving countless lives with every keystroke. In the Soviet factories, Yelena and her colleagues faced increasing pressure. Production quotas surged, and the machinery groaned under constant use. One day, she noticed a batch of shells that had been improperly forged. With little time to spare, she halted the line and corrected the defects, ensuring that the ammunition reaching the front would not fail under fire. Her diligence, and that of countless women like her, kept the engines of war running and preserved the lives of soldiers relying on their labor. Exhaustion was constant, but so was the knowledge that their work mattered beyond the factory walls. Sophie's missions in Paris grew ever more dangerous. She was tasked with delivering intelligence about troop movements to the resistance, slipping past checkpoints, navigating streets patrolled by armed soldiers, and avoiding detection at every turn. One evening, she narrowly escaped capture by German officers, blending into a crowd and disappearing into the alleys. Each successful delivery bolstered the resistance's ability to strike strategically, disrupt supply chains, and save lives. Though invisible to history, Sophie's bravery had tangible consequences that rippled across the occupied city. As the summer wore on, the effects of their labor began to converge on the battlefield. Soldiers protected by Elena's care returned to duty. Units guided by Margaret's decrypted intelligence executed flawless maneuvers. Yelena's tanks and ammunition provided crucial support in decisive engagements. Resistance operations in Paris, aided by Sophie's daring, disrupted enemy supply lines and communications. Each woman, in her own sphere, had shaped events that collectively altered the course of the war, though the world outside remained largely unaware of their contributions. One evening, as the sun set over London, Elena sat quietly in a temporary clinic, listening to the distant echo of artillery. She thought of the soldiers she had treated, of the victories their combined efforts had enabled, and of the relentless struggle that still lay ahead. Across the continent, Margaret wiped sweat from her brow and allowed herself a brief moment of reflection, knowing that her unseen labor had saved hundreds, perhaps thousands. In Moscow, Yelena paused before another tank, envisioning it on the battlefield, and felt a quiet pride for the countless lives her hands had shielded. Sophie, hidden in the shadowed streets of Paris, folded the last of her intelligence reports, aware that every piece of information she delivered was a step toward freedom. Together, though worlds apart, they represented a silent army of courage, intelligence, and resilience. Their victories were quiet, their sacrifices largely invisible, but their impact was undeniable. Every healed soldier, every intercepted message, every functioning tank, and every successful espionage mission was a testament to their skill and bravery. They were unsung architects of victory, whose labor, ingenuity, and courage had shaped history in ways the world would scarcely acknowledge. And as night fell, each woman carried a private knowledge of her own indispensable role. They were ordinary women thrust into extraordinary circumstances, yet through their labor, intelligence, and courage, they had become extraordinary. The war would be won not just by generals and soldiers, but by the quiet, relentless contributions of women who refused to yield, who worked in shadows, and who risked everything to ensure survival, victory, and freedom. The war had entered its final, relentless phase, and the consequences of every unseen effort were becoming clear. Elena's field hospital was overflowing. The injured and exhausted soldiers arrived in waves, yet she moved among them with unwavering focus. Each bandage she applied, each wound she cleaned, each whispered word of encouragement carried weight beyond measure. She had learned to anticipate fear, to steady trembling hands, to calm hearts racing from trauma. Every life saved was a silent act of defiance against the chaos engulfing the world, proof that courage could manifest not only in the front lines, but in the quiet, relentless acts of care. Margaret sat before the Enigma machine for long hours, decoding messages that carried the destinies of battalions. A single misinterpreted cipher could result in disaster, and yet she worked with a composure born of discipline and quiet determination. One decrypted message revealed an enemy plan to ambush an Allied convoy carrying vital supplies and reinforcements. She alerted command immediately, knowing that lives hung in the balance. When reports came back confirming the convoy had avoided disaster, Margaret allowed herself a rare smile, understanding that her unseen labor had shaped history in ways most would never recognize. In the icy factories of Moscow, Yelena moved with mechanical precision, welding armor, assembling tanks, and inspecting shells for flaws. Production quotas were more grueling than ever, but she understood that every piece of metal she touched could save soldiers' lives. One afternoon, she noticed a turret mechanism slightly misaligned, a flaw invisible to most. She halted the assembly line, corrected the issue, and ensured the tank would perform flawlessly on the battlefield. Her meticulous attention to detail, and that of the countless women around her, had become a lifeline for troops who would never meet the hands that forged their survival. Sophie navigated occupied Paris with nerves sharpened by danger and instinct. Her latest mission required delivering critical intelligence about enemy troop movements to the resistance. She moved through shadowed streets, blending seamlessly into the city's rhythm, aware that capture could mean torture or death. Every checkpoint, every casual conversation with an occupying officer demanded perfect timing and calm. Yet she persisted, understanding that her courage and skill could alter the course of an operation, protect lives, and weaken enemy control from within. And then, the consequences of their labor converged on the battlefield. Soldiers healed by Elena returned to duty, their morale bolstered by the care that had kept them alive. Units guided by Margaret's intelligence executed strategic maneuvers that saved lives and thwarted enemy plans. Yelena's tanks and ammunition provided decisive support, turning the tide in critical engagements. Resistance fighters, aided by Sophie's intelligence, struck with precision, disrupting supply lines and communications in ways that had far-reaching effects. Though the world outside rarely acknowledged them, the victories bore the imprint of their courage and skill. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast golden light across the hospital ward, Elena paused to watch a young soldier asleep in a cot. His uniform was torn, his face streaked with dirt and exhaustion, yet he slept peacefully, unaware of the hands that had saved him. Across Europe, Margaret leaned back in her chair, breathing deeply after a long day, knowing that countless soldiers lived because she had intercepted critical intelligence. In Moscow, Yelena gazed at a line of completed tanks, imagining them on the battlefield and realizing that her efforts had protected lives she would never see. In Paris, Sophie slipped into a safe house, exhausted but triumphant, aware that her latest mission had enabled the resistance to strike effectively and safely. In these quiet moments, each woman understood something profound. Their work, though largely invisible, had shaped the course of events, altered the lives of thousands, and ensured that survival and victory were possible. They were ordinary women who had risen to extraordinary challenges, their courage, skill, and endurance becoming a silent yet indelible force in the war. And as night fell, the world outside continued its chaos. Yet within the hearts and minds of these women, a quiet triumph lingered. They had been the unsung pillars of victory, healers, codebreakers, builders, and spies, whose contributions had reshaped history. Their names might never appear in headlines, their deeds might never be immortalized in statues or medals, but the echoes of their courage resonated across battlefields, factories, and secret rooms, ensuring that the story of WWII was not only one of guns and generals, but also of women whose invisible hands had held the world together when it teetered on the brink. The final months of the war were a relentless storm of movement, strategy, and human endurance. Battles raged across continents, but behind each victory were the invisible contributions of women who had labored, risked, and persevered in silence. Elena moved through the hospital one last time before the front began to shift in the Allies' favor. The wards were quieter now. The soldiers who had survived carried forward, ready to fight another day. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, reflecting on the countless lives she had touched, the small victories of care and courage that had been invisible to history, but monumental to those who lived. Margaret sat at her desk, the Enigma machines silent for the first time in weeks. The final intercepted messages had been decoded, the enemy's plans disrupted, and the critical intelligence she had supplied had helped turn the tide of entire campaigns. She leaned back, exhausted yet fulfilled, knowing that her unseen work had saved thousands of lives and changed the course of battles, even if the world would never know her name. Her victory was quiet, profound, and eternal in its impact. In Moscow, Yelena walked among the tanks she had helped produce, inspecting the last units ready for deployment. The factory had become a monument to determination and skill, every piece of steel a testament to human endurance. Soldiers would roll into battle protected by the machines she and her colleagues had built, their lives shielded by hands that labored tirelessly behind the scenes. Yelena allowed herself a brief smile, understanding that though recognition might never come, her work had made an irreplaceable difference. Sophie moved through Paris one final time, delivering intelligence that would help the resistance secure the city and protect countless lives as liberation approached. The danger had not vanished, but the risk was now balanced by the knowledge that her efforts had been decisive. Every message, every covert maneuver, had contributed to the broader fight for freedom. She paused in the shadows, listening to the quiet of a city beginning to breathe again, knowing that her courage had mattered more than words could ever convey. As news of victory spread across continents, the war slowly receded into memory, leaving behind scars, stories, and a changed world. For the unsung women, life would resume in quieter ways, but the echoes of their bravery remained. They had endured bombings, secrecy, relentless labor, and near-constant danger, and through it all, they had shaped history. Elena, Margaret, Yelena, and Sophie represented the countless women whose courage was invisible yet indispensable, whose sacrifices and skill had tipped the scales of war without ever appearing in the headlines. History had largely forgotten them, but the world they helped save bore witness in every life preserved, every victory won, and every freedom reclaimed. They had proven that heroism is not only found in the roar of guns or the movements of armies, but in quiet, steadfast dedication, in intelligence applied under pressure, in hands that heal, create, and protect, and in hearts that persist against overwhelming odds. As they each returned to the rhythms of civilian life, Elena tending to a small clinic, Margaret pursuing her studies, Yelena resuming her work in industry, Sophie blending back into a liberated Paris, they carried with them the knowledge of their invisible victories. They had shaped history, forged survival from chaos, and embodied courage in its purest form. The war had tried to erase their names, but the impact of their deeds endured. And though the world would not always remember who they were, it would always feel the results of their bravery. The unsung women of WWII, nurses, codebreakers, factory workers, and spies had fought in ways that were silent yet powerful, invisible yet decisive. They had been the hidden backbone of victory, the quiet architects of history, and the enduring testament to human courage, resilience, and sacrifice. In the end, the story of WWII was not just one of battles and generals, but of women whose hands, minds, and hearts had held the world together when it teetered on the edge. Their legacy, though largely unseen, had shaped the very course of history, proving that true heroism often works quietly in the shadows, waiting for the moment the world can finally understand its significance. Even after the fighting had ceased, the shadows of the war lingered. Cities bore scars, families mourned, and soldiers carried memories of the battles they had survived. Yet for the women who had labored unseen, the aftermath was both relief and quiet reflection. Elena walked through the streets of London, past bombed-out buildings now slowly being rebuilt. She paused outside a small cafe, watching children play where rubble once lay. The war had taken much, but it had not stolen hope. In her hands rested the knowledge that countless soldiers she had tended to were alive because she had refused to yield, because she had dared to confront fear and exhaustion with courage. Margaret returned to Bletchley Park one last time before the facility closed, lingering among the machines and stacks of decrypted messages. Every code she had broken, every intelligence report she had crafted, had been invisible to the public eye, yet it had carried immense consequence. She ran her fingers over the smooth keys of the Enigma machine one final time, remembering the long nights, the tension, the tiny victories. It was quiet work, almost sterile in appearance, but it had determined the fates of thousands. Margaret understood that heroism did not require recognition. It required precision, patience, and the courage to bear responsibility when no one was watching. In Moscow, Yelena walked through the now silent factory, the machines at rest after months of relentless labor. Tanks and shells lined the storage bays, ready for the next call that would never come. She touched the cold metal of a tank turret, imagining the soldiers it had protected, and felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. The factory had been a crucible of endurance, innovation, and courage. Every woman who had worked beside her, welding, assembling, inspecting, had contributed to something far larger than themselves. The world might never know their names, but they had safeguarded countless lives, and that legacy would endure quietly in history. Sophie moved through a liberated Paris with cautious joy, breathing in the freedom that had once been a distant hope. The streets she had once navigated in shadows were now alive with laughter, music, and celebration. She remembered every narrow escape, every coded message she had delivered, every risk she had taken. The freedom she now witnessed had been shaped by her courage and the courage of countless others like her. Though invisible to the world, her contributions had been decisive. A reminder that bravery often works in silence, altering the course of history from behind the scenes. Together, these women, separated by geography, language, and circumstance, shared a bond invisible to the world. They had endured fatigue, fear, danger, and invisibility. They had healed, deciphered, built, and spied. They had shaped victories, saved lives, and ensured that freedom survived against staggering odds. And though their stories were largely unsung, their legacy was evident in every soldier who returned home, every city that rose from rubble, every battle won, and every life preserved. In the quiet moments after the war, Elena, Margaret, Yelena, and Sophie carried their experiences as invisible medals of courage. They did not seek fame or glory. Their reward was the knowledge that their labor and bravery had mattered, that history had been shaped not only by guns and generals, but by the hands, minds, and hearts of women who refused to be invisible. History may forget names, dates, and even deeds, but the echoes of their courage endure. Every healed soldier, every decrypted message, every tank forged, every intelligence report delivered. These were victories that no textbook could fully capture. They were triumphs written in sweat, blood, and quiet heroism, and they shaped the very world that the post-war generation would inherit. And so, the story of the unsung women of WWII, nurses, codebreakers, factory workers, and spies, is a story not of invisibility, but of invisible impact. They were the architects of survival, the silent defenders of freedom, and the enduring testament to what human courage and resilience can achieve when the world demands the impossible. In every victory, every life saved, and every freedom reclaimed, their legacy lives on, proving that true heroism often operates quietly, far from the spotlight, yet leaves an indelible mark on history. Years later, the world would celebrate victory, rebuild cities, and honor soldiers on parade. Yet the contributions of countless women remained largely invisible. Elena walked through a quiet London park, the laughter of children filling the air where once bombs had fallen. She traced her fingers along the worn handles of a first aid kit she still carried in memory, thinking of every soldier she had tended to, every life she had preserved, and every moment she had refused to give in to exhaustion or fear. She had been unseen, yet she had mattered more than anyone could measure. Margaret Sinclair, now a lecturer in mathematics, often remembered the dimly lit rooms of Bletchley Park, the clatter of the Enigma machines, the tense silences, the triumphs only a few understood. All of it had shaped her life and countless others. Her eyes, once weary from endless nights, now shone with quiet pride. She knew that the invisible victories she had won had saved lives, altered campaigns, and contributed to the downfall of tyranny. History might not have written her name in bold, but she had been a pivot point on which thousands had turned toward survival. In Moscow, Yelena Ivanova returned to the now peaceful streets, the clamor of the tank factory replaced by everyday life. She touched the metal of a completed tank one last time, remembering long nights of welding, forging, and assembling. Those machines had carried soldiers into battle and brought many home again. She had worked in anonymity, alongside countless other women, yet together they had held a front line that history books barely mentioned. The strength, endurance, and skill of ordinary women had altered the fate of nations. Sophie Dubois strolled through a liberated Paris, the city alive with celebration and the scent of spring. Every corner, every street, every building she had once navigated in fear now brimmed with life. She thought of the secret messages she had delivered, the resistance fighters she had guided, and the dangers she had faced daily. She had been unseen, but her courage had been decisive. Her story, like those of countless other women, was hidden in the shadows of history, yet its impact had been monumental. Together, their lives testified to a truth often overlooked, that the war was not won solely on the battlefield, but in hospitals, factories, code rooms, and shadowed alleys. Heroism was not only measured in medals and headlines, but in tireless labor, silent intelligence, and relentless courage. Each woman had faced exhaustion, danger, and invisibility, Yet she had persisted, altering the course of the war in ways few would ever know. History may have forgotten their names, but it could never forget their impact. Every healed soldier, every piece of intelligence, every tank assembled, and every mission completed quietly shifted the balance of life and death. The world they saved bore the imprint of their courage, skill, and endurance. They were the invisible architects of survival, the unsung heroes whose hands, minds, and hearts held the fabric of history together when the world teetered on the edge, and in that realization lay their true legacy. It was not fame or glory they sought, but the knowledge that their work mattered, that courage in the shadows could shape the destiny of nations, and that resilience in the unseen moments could ripple outward, touching lives far beyond their own. The unsung women of WWII, nurses, codebreakers, factory workers, and spies, had proven that heroism often works quietly, yet leaves a mark that endures through time. As the sun set on a world slowly healing, Elena, Margaret, Yelena, and Sophie carried their silent victories with them, a testament to human courage, ingenuity, and the extraordinary power of ordinary people in extraordinary times. And though history may have forgotten the details, the lives they saved, the victories they enabled, and the freedoms they helped secure would echo forever. A quiet, unyielding tribute to the women history forgot, but who the world owes everything to. The war had ended, but the echoes of it remained in every quiet corner of Europe. Cities bore scars that could not be erased by bricks or mortar. The memories of those who had fought and survived lingered in hearts and minds. For Elena, walking through the rebuilt streets of London, each child laughing in the parks felt like a small victory. Proof that life, however fragile, could endure. She often paused to reflect on the soldiers she had tended, the lives she had saved, and the endless nights she had spent stitching wounds and calming fear. Every life preserved was a silent testament to the courage and resilience she had carried in her own hands. Margaret, now teaching young students the mathematics that had once guided her through coded messages, often thought of Bletchley Park. The quiet rooms, the machines clattering with secrets, the endless nights spent decoding enemy plans. Those moments had determined the course of countless battles. She understood that the world outside would never know the weight of the decisions she had made, or the lives that had been preserved because of her precision. Yet she carried a quiet pride, knowing that heroism often lived in patience, intellect, and unseen effort. In Moscow, Yelena walked among the empty halls of the factory that had once roared with activity. Tanks she had welded, ammunition she had inspected, all now stood as silent witnesses to the labor of thousands of women who had worked tirelessly to keep soldiers alive. She traced her fingers along the steel, remembering the late nights, the blistered hands, and the unrelenting determination. Though the world might never recognize her contributions, she knew the lives that had been saved, the battles that had been won, and the countless soldiers who owed their survival to her unseen work. Sophie wandered the streets of Paris, now vibrant with freedom and life, feeling a quiet joy she had never known during the occupation. Every alleyway she had once navigated with fear now brimmed with light and laughter. She remembered the coded messages she had delivered, the clandestine meetings, and the constant danger that had accompanied each mission. Every success had rippled outward, aiding the resistance, saving lives, and helping reclaim a city under oppression. Though her bravery had gone largely unnoticed by history, its impact was undeniable. These women, though separated by distance and circumstance, shared a bond forged in the fires of war. They had endured exhaustion, danger, and invisibility, yet their contributions had been decisive. Nurses, codebreakers, factory workers, and spies, they were the silent forces that shaped battles, preserved lives, and ensured that freedom could flourish. Their courage was quiet but unyielding, their heroism invisible but essential. And as they reflected on the war years, they realized that their legacy was not measured in medals or headlines, but in the lives that continued. The families reunited, and the nations rebuilt. They had been the invisible architects of survival, the unseen defenders of hope, and the enduring testament to the extraordinary power of ordinary people in extraordinary times. Though the world may forget their names, the echoes of their courage, ingenuity, and resilience would resonate forever, carried in every life they touched and every freedom they helped secure. Years passed, and the world slowly healed from the scars of war. Cities were rebuilt, families reunited, and soldiers returned home. Yet for the women who had labored unseen, Elena, Margaret, Yelena, and Sophie, the memories of those years remained vivid, a permanent imprint on their hearts. They had endured exhaustion, danger, and invisibility, and through it all, they had shaped the course of history in ways the world would rarely acknowledge. Elena walked through a London park, watching children play where once bombs had fallen. Every laugh, every carefree step reminded her of the soldiers she had tended, the lives she had saved, and the quiet courage that had carried her through endless nights. She understood that heroism did not always require medals. Sometimes it was measured in compassion, endurance, and the lives preserved when no one was watching. Margaret, now a respected mathematician, reflected on her time at Bletchley Park. The messages she had decoded, the intelligence she had provided, had altered battles and saved thousands of lives. Yet no one outside the walls had seen it. She had learned that true impact often remained invisible, but that did not make it any less powerful. Every cipher cracked was a victory. Every life saved a testament to the quiet, extraordinary influence of women working in the shadows. Yelena stood before the tanks she had helped forge, now silent and still. The machines that had carried soldiers into battle bore witness to the sweat, skill, and determination of countless women who labored without recognition. Though her contributions were unseen, she knew their significance. Every life protected, every mission supported, every battle survived. In the quiet strength of her work, Yelena had shaped the destiny of nations. Sophie strolled through a liberated Paris, the city alive with freedom and light. She remembered every covert mission, every risk, every secret message delivered. Her courage had helped the resistance, disrupted enemy plans, and safeguarded lives. Though history might not tell her story, the streets she walked, the city she had helped liberate, and the lives preserved spoke of her bravery louder than words ever could. Together, these women, nurses, codebreakers, factory workers, and spies, embodied a truth too often forgotten, that victory was not only forged in battlefields, but in hospitals, factories, and hidden rooms. They had endured unimaginable pressure, risk, and invisibility, yet they had persevered, shaping the outcome of a global conflict through intelligence, skill, and unwavering courage. History may have forgotten their names, yet it could never forget the impact of their actions. Every healed soldier, every decrypted message, every tank assembled, every mission completed. These were victories that defined the war as much as any battle, any army, any general. Their courage had held the world together when it teetered on the brink, proving that heroism often works quietly, invisibly, and without recognition, yet leaves an indelible mark on history. And so, the unsung women of WWII, the invisible architects of survival, the quiet defenders of freedom, remain forever part of the story. Their legacy endures not in headlines, but in the lives they saved, the victories they enabled, and the world they helped preserve. They were ordinary women who did extraordinary things, and though history may have forgotten them, the world owes everything to their courage, their resilience, and their unwavering determination.